coming late, but he's coming. So anyhow, thank you all very much for coming out today. How many for you is this your first time here? Almost everybody. Yeah, we got good turnover. Which is not good. We appreciate you coming out tonight. So first off, we usually like to provide an opportunity if anybody has anything that you would like to talk about briefly, anything that would just take a minute or two, and if there's something that you've been working on that you'd like to share, or if you're looking for a job, or if you have jobs at the place where you work that you'd like to share with the group, we like to give a few minutes to people to do that. So is there anything that anybody would like to say or show us? If not, that's fine.
Could I just give a quick self-introduction?
Sure.
That's okay?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Corey. So I'm very new to coding. I just started teaching myself not even 2 months ago. My background is I'm in education. I teach English. I taught English in Japan a couple of years, and I studied linguistics in university. And yeah, because of my linguistics background, I'm learning coding pretty quickly and having a lot of fun with it. And my goal is next year to get into IT at some point.
Anybody else? Thank you.
I'm actually not a JavaScript developer. My daughter is here, but I'm not. I should say I work for a company up north here, well, just up on 1604 and 10 called Newtek, NEWTK. We make a lot of products that are used in film video. We're very much a software company, and I didn't come here for this reason, but we're always looking for good developers, I can tell you that. Never find enough. So if anybody is interested, or those people who are, NEWTK.com will find us.
What kind of software?
We build products to use for live web streaming, TV, so Kent's 5 use our stuff. Probably 80% of the commercial live streams done on the web are probably produced using our equipment. Multi-camera live production tools, real-time video, stuff like that.
Cool. That's great. And by the way, if you ever want to share any links to anything, feel free to add that on our meetup so that you can comment on the meeting there so that people can find a link to it. Awesome, thanks. Anything else? All right, cool. I neglected to introduce myself. My name is Chris Bateman. I've been doing JavaScript for 7 or 8 years or so. I work at USAID as a developer there, mainly doing front-end stuff. So, Kevin may have some announcements when he comes later. Oh, and this is great timing because the pizza's here, so that way I can let everybody get your food before I get started with the presentation. So, yeah, let's do that. Thank you. And Kevin is bringing the drinks, and he's going to be here soon.
Okay, awesome.
But at least you can start the pizza.
This one's not stuck in an elevator.
Okay. I just met someone just I can't remember his name. Was it Southern Careers Institute?
What kind of programming languages do you use?
Oh, so we use
I went
Pen.
to just
A lot of the real-time video processing stuff's in C, C++, or assembly. UI stuff is C#.
What do you do for
We do a lot of web control stuff in JavaScript, I should say. So, use quite a few languages.
Oh, okay, so stuff.
What do you do?
I do,
Moving a lot of stuff.
like one WordPress calendar. I just finished that. I was plugging it through. But I was getting into it. Really start coding.
It's definitely
It's like easy, like it's basically the easy
So you stop now.
Yes, I'm pretty comfortable in PHP. So,
I am
Yeah.
originally been here 20 years now.
Oh,
Yeah, no, it's surprised everyone.
It's like a big dinner.
So, I mean, my home is San Antonio.
Should have waited for you to go first.
So you were in the military?
Yeah.
That's really cool. What, Air Force? Army?
I know everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. You're too nice.
I mean,
Cool.
yeah, it was in Korea and I was not.
Man, I'm so jealous. I love it. Like, in Korea.
Yeah.
No,
My sister, her husband's in the army.
she teaches herself.
What's, what guy? Oh, hack. Probably by like China and North Korea, maybe a little bit North Korea. Maybe like one computer, like a PlayStation. My sister's husband, he's the air traffic controller.
So,
She just went not too long ago with the visit and without me.
so you say,
A lot of my family is
You're the outcast.
yeah, well, my dad was not, but my mom was. She had my second baby.
What about Nick? So you've been here your whole life. Why did you stay? John. Okay, that makes sense. San Antonio? San Antonio. What schools did you go to?
There's so many.
Up north. Okay. I lived here a little bit when I was 11. So,
The JavaScript seemed pretty.
I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't go to
Yeah.
that. It's over to do that.
Okay.
There's so much like just websites and more and more advanced UI.
silly company name.
I just started.
Well, beer.
No, it's good to know programming in general.
It was a long time ago.
Even if you're like more
Since then.
Yeah.
information system based, just having a background is good.
Is it solely used for
It makes you more valuable programmer. A lot more valuable.
You definitely should, but that's kind of
Just across the drill.
crash course. So it's like, JavaScript is like in the description language of the house. And like that for a long time. In the last five-ish years or so, some Node.js came out and Node was a way of running JavaScript on the servers.
Where are you playing? Like going?
JavaScript on the servers. So that's pretty
Wherever they are.
Wherever I can taking that even further where you can take a node out and you can package that up.
I recommend going over.
See, almost that kind of thing.
I think everyone should do it once.
So there's a lot of options. The ability of JavaScript to kind of do non-browser stuff is simply pretty. It's been like that for a while.
Do we work in
Slowing down, so
Have you heard
it's
of WeWork?
No.
it's fun. and
Oh no, it's like kind of like even a break.
Yeah, but then they also have WeWork.
Oh.
You don't have Walter City. I just saw it on
introductory course in
blur.
Oh, okay.
I was like, oh, that's so cool.
whereas JavaScript is not.
Well, it depends on the definition. There's different ways to define it. Classical.
It's in elevators.
depends what,
Oh, man.
things,
I don't know if I want to go back to the
you know, a lot of what we choose has to be
Yeah.
real time,
Yeah.
it's not that fast.
I'm pretty sick.
Yeah, man. There are lots of things I miss. Our son was so she was kind of nervous, and we're doing overseas,
40 streams we get, so,
and like she was far more comfortable.
you know, it can't take
regarding safety.
with 60 milliseconds of
This place is dangerous. What the heck?
No, it's
I do not miss the young skaters.
Now you're gonna make me
Search. My apartment was on this really steep hill, and in the morning to hear I had a scooter, like 50cc.
I don't like going up. I'll eat up there.
Okay, folks, who's Nick Balderas? You got in, excellent.
Yes.
Okay. He messaged asking about if we're actually having it tonight. Sorry about running late. Yeah, things are crazy. Who are our newcomers? I see a lot of new faces. Who's here from CSS DevConf? My constant pleading to them didn't work. Newcomers. Okay, so y'all are from Coda. Okay, that's
Rackspace.
Rackspace. Okay. Random. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then you were new?
I'm from UTech.
Okay, cool. Awesome, welcome, and if y'all have any comments after, please feel free to let me know. Hopefully you found this event center all right. If the directions weren't clear enough, let me know. I'll get that updated for anybody else who comes along. We have this once a month on the third Wednesday of every month, and yeah. So I'm going to start with some community announcements. We have a Gitter IM chat room. Oops, not that. This? No, not that. Sorry. Here, go to that and then there. Yeah, so you can read between messages between Danielle and I and see where the hidden key is. There's a hidden key that Danielle used to get in. See, it's right there. It's under the paint can, in case you were wondering. That's where the hidden key is. Shouldn't put it back right there, should I? Anyway, if you want to chat throughout the month, feel free to jump on there, ask questions. Got some folks who know a little bit about React tonight. Chris is going to present on it, so good place to ask questions about that. That's gitter.im/hillcountryjs/contributors, or I should put the link somewhere. Maybe I'll put it on the meetup page. But Front Porch Conf, actually, I don't know if they've finished already. They have a Dallas event. Okay, so October 24th. So if you need a last-minute event to go to, you can go up to Front Porch Conf up in Dallas and learn about some cool things. And there's also let's see where this takes us. This year. Next year they're going to have something, I'm sure. I'll disclose that. Sponsors, we got Geekdom. They host the event center, and so they've got a job board if you're looking for jobs, but they also do co-working upstairs. So pretty cool folks. USAA is kind of helping out here and there. Tech Systems provides the food, and they are currently looking for 2 to 3 UI developers for Rackspace over the next 2 months. And just AngularJS, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And I think at least one of their positions is with some of the folks who come here sometimes. And yeah, so if you're interested, reach out to Tech Systems. That's how you spell it. Kind of helps that all the notes are up there. I don't have to recite for you. Austin Coding Academy, a very basic page. Wow.
Still simple.
Okay. What happened? Jeez.
Are you sure they code?
Wow. They may have gone out of business.
They may have. I'm curious about that. They were going to sponsor the drinks.
Today.
That's good. That's good. I wonder what happened to them. Okay, well, they were gonna sponsor, they may still sponsor, we don't know, we'll see. Otherwise, the drinks are sponsored by me. You're all welcome. And then, yeah, so we've got Shiner and Freetail. If you are of the age, go for it. If you're not of the age, don't. This person reached out to me, Heather Smith. She's from General Assembly. And they're going to be here tomorrow night hosting a beer and coding event. Sounds kind of fun. They're going to have Freetail beer as well, so if you like the Freetail stuff. There's that. Oktoberfest tour. Oh, it's going to be at Freetail Brewing. That's awesome. I can't convince my wife to let me do that. But that starts at 6:30, runs till 8:30. Dinner and code, I haven't seen that before. I wonder what that is. That's kind of cool. So there's a dinner and code meetup that we now know about.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of those.
Are they good?
Yeah.
No pressure.
Oh, no, the spread is great.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really geared towards new programmers.
Mhm.
We're using Python for teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been doing some, helping out with the people that are on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's around town, and it's on Meetup, so if you do Meetup, it's there. And I'm gonna come over here and throw that under other meetups. There. Anyway, yeah, that's tomorrow night, last minute, but it's free, I think? I think so. I mean, yes, it's free. Freetail Brewery is up on 1604, kind of near 281. It's a neat little place.
Like Southwest?
Yes, Northwest Military, kind of there. There's a Freddy's up there and stuff like that. And then there's a whole events page. There's SA Web Dev. I think they're doing every Thursday or something. That page doesn't exist anymore. Let's see. Yes, every Tuesday. So you go to the Tuesday one, and then you go to this one, and then you go to the other one after that. A lot of stuff there.
Basically, you don't pay for dinner.
Yeah, for three nights in a row. Don't have to worry about it. It's covered. Okay, that's that. We're good. You all already did your own announcement, so I'm going to skip through that. I'm going to start off by going over a quick presentation or kind of semi-presentation that I'm working on. There's going to be a lot of missing content, but I did want to throw it out there just to run through it. Okay. Hi, people. I banged the podium. So I shouldn't hit right here either, or like scratch. Okay. We stream on YouTube as well, so check out the Twitter account. It should be up on there if you want to watch again or something like that, or you miss a meeting or something. Okay, so this is something that I'm putting together about the layers of automated UI testing. UI testing is like browser testing. You make a browser automatically do stuff for you to test that it works and everything. So it's really complicated, and I was trying to explain it in slides and in words, and it really didn't work. So I tried to put this thing together, and I'm still working on it. But basically, the idea is that when you want to run your automated tests, it's going to go through multiple layers. We're going to get into like a CI/CD server, Selenium servers, all these different things. So just to try and talk through what those different ideas are in case you are interested in it. So the first thing we have is this trigger. It can either be like a manual trigger that's like typing npm test at the bottom there. See all the work that I do. Yeah, so typing npm test, that would like trigger your test to run, or some like node test or something like that. So that's a manual trigger. You might have like a button on a page as well that you could do it. If you have a Jenkins server, you could manually start it. There's also GitHub hooks that can work as triggers. Those can start your pages. So when you push up to GitHub, or you push up to GitLab, or you push up to whatever code repository you use, if you use one, it can trigger the test to run. So that's like through an API thing. And then there's also this idea of cron jobs. Cron jobs run depending on a time. So you can say every day at X hour, or every 24 hours, or every 7 days, that sort of thing. So these triggers are going to trigger the job runner to go. So the job runner can be anything. It can be a local, like your local machine. It's just like a Node server if you're running your test in Node. It could be a CI/CD server. Jenkins CI/CD is a CI/CD server. CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous development or deployment. I think deployment. And the basic idea with it is it handles building your code base out and doing things about it. So if you have a front-end code base and you want to minify your files, you want to combine them all together, you want to do some sort of transpilation or something, you can do that locally, but you can also do it on a CI/CD server, and it kind of is this shared thing that everybody uses to move code along down the process. So you trigger your job to run. The job runner talks to your Selenium library. Selenium is a browser automation tool. I'll talk about it in a minute. But there's a Selenium library, and it's going to drive Selenium. So I've been working with WebDriver IO a bunch. There's also a lot of Ruby ones. There's some Java ones. There's some Python ones. A lot of stuff out there. So this is going to kind of control what Selenium does. So along with that, you're going to have a test framework on this layer. Mocha, Jasmine, something else. I think there's like Anna, and there's another one out there. There's a ton out there. And your test framework is going to organize your tests for you and let it be easier to skip test or pass test or do certain things around your test. It's just like an organizer to make it a little bit easier and more maintainable to write your test. Along with that, you're going to have an assertion library. Your assertion library is going to programmatically tell whether something is true or false. And if it's false, it's going to be an error. If it's true, it's going to be a success. So your assertion library tells the test framework whether the test is passing or not. The test framework will then report back at the end what's going on. So assertions are basically saying, I expect this to equal this. So you have a calculated value or a value that you get from the program, from the Selenium runner, and then you have your expected value that you just manually enter in there. So that's all part of the Selenium library, and from there, the Selenium library will call your Selenium server, ask for a session. Selenium's going to boot up a browser, depending on what you ask for, and it's going to start doing things on that browser. It'll load a URL, it'll click on certain things, it'll get information on the page, things like that. So your Selenium server is going to be, it can be like a local server that you have running. You can have a cloud service like BrowserStack or Sauce Labs or Testing Bot, something like that. So that's your Selenium server. All your Selenium server does is spin up browsers for you and then do actions on those browsers. And this is where your browsers are. You've got devices, and you can kind of define that. And then when you load up the browser, you're going to hit your server under test. This could be your local server that you're running locally, localhost, whatever. A staging server, a production server. If you've got like style guides or something, you can hit there. And you should be able to pass this in from your test runner. When you trigger the job, you can say, I want to test this one. So we're way down deep right now. We're taking actions on the page itself to test things out. So I want to test that you can log in. I'm going to load the login page. I'm going to enter an input into the username and password. I'm going to click the login button, and then I'm going to do an assertion that the page title has changed to you're logged in or something like that. So that's what you're doing, and you've got this server under test. Along with that server, a lot of times you're going to need some custom data, because if you're trying to do the login step, you need a user who you're going to log into. So that server is going to hook into this custom data set. It's either using like a mock database, which is just a fake database that doesn't really work like a normal database works. It just has a lot of dummy data that you can do assertions against. So I expect this data to be XYZ, and you go through the browser and you get that data out. You can also send API requests to a live server. So if you want to test staging or something, you send an API request to that server to say, hey, create this user for me with this information. and then you go in through the browser and you say, okay, I expect this user to be here and everything. So the database is going to return back to the browser. The browser is going to return values to the Selenium server. The Selenium server is going to talk back to, I need to fix the slide here. It's going to talk back to the Selenium library. The Selenium library is going to talk back to the job runner. It's going to take that assertion information, and it's going to report it back to the job runner. And then the job runner is going to, I need to work on these slides. I really do. The job runner is going to send back to that trigger and let the trigger know whether the test passed or failed. And then there's one other thing that can happen. The job runner can create a report, and this report will have really cool information. If you just search for Allure Reporter, it's a pretty good one. You see it's got information about failed builds, passing, or failed things, passing things. This is what the report looks like. So it's a nice interface for seeing how your tests are doing, and it's got different environments that you can test on and a whole bunch of stuff. So there's yet another server in here that is going to host all of your reporting information. And with that, like that's it. That's the entire life cycle of an automated UI test and where it goes through everything. I think I covered everything. I've been trying to think of like what are all the different parts of it, and this is about it. So if you want to do UI testing, it's not just getting a Selenium library like WebDriver IO in place. If you use Angular, you might use something like Protractor, things like that. It's a whole process that you need to put in place to run your tests. So that's all I wanted to go through. Any questions on that? Yep.
Is there a website where you can download all the software to?
It really depends on your environment, how your workplace is set up to use certain build tools. So if you've got like a Java backend, you're going to have a Java server that you need. If you've got a Node backend or something, like you're going to go through that. And then from a CI/CD perspective, I mentioned Jenkins, but your team could be using CodeShip or Travis CI or Circle CI, or there's a whole bunch of other CIs out there. So that depends on what your team kind of has in place, and if they don't have anything in place, or if you're doing this on your own, you kind of get it set up on your own. And what else is there? So you've got like your trigger. Oh, I forgot triggers can also be like Slack commands. You can send it through Slack if you use Slack or like a chat command. So yeah, the job runner, that's your CI/CD server. The Selenium library, that's going to be something like WebDriver IO, or like that's separate. And then even in WebDriver IO, you have to decide whether you want to use Mocha or Jasmine or something else. It's a lot of choices, and I don't think you're going to make the wrong one. It just really depends on how everything is already set up, if there is stuff already set up. Trying to see. Yeah, this one, whether you use BrowserStack or Sauce Labs or TestingBot. When I started a job a while back, they were using BrowserStack, so I started using it. And then I think they wanted to switch to Sauce Labs at some point, but that also depends. So it's like, I kind of want to have a checklist out there of like, and maybe with this, I want to add links to different websites to say, for this layer, here's the tools that you can use to make it work. Yeah.
The back end that you showed us, or rather the display that was kind of showing you what tests you had running and the status, the web
Yeah.
interface.
Yeah.
What was that from?
This is called Allure, and it's, just a second, Allure Reporter. It's an open source framework, and they actually have a bunch of different things. It's kind of it's just a generic reporter that takes in a specific data set in a specific format and will create the page from it. So you see there's a bunch of different options here. Here's a Mocha one if you use Mocha. If you use Cucumber.js or Cucumber, which I think is a Ruby thing, there's a Python version of it. So all these kind of adapters that build that website for you. And with WebDriver IO, it actually, so I'm just going to mention this because I'm familiar with it, but they have a reporter. And what this does, it doesn't actually generate the website. It's going to generate a directory that's going to have your reports inside of it. And that's going to look like, let's see. I didn't do it here. Let me see. Driver IO. Maybe it's in sample. There we go. Okay. So there's this Allure report directory. So if I look at that, oops, wrong one. Allure results. The sound's working again. That's good. See all these JSON files? These are the reports that get sent to Allure. And so if you wanted to create it, you would do Allure space something, report open, generate. So you'd say Allure generate, and then you pass in the folder that you want to generate. And so Allure is completely different from WebDriver IO at this point. And now it creates that Allure report, and then you can do that. And now I have the report running locally of my data. So there's other ones out there. There's JUnit. Has a pretty good integration with Jenkins, and it's pretty easy to set up. It's not quite as, I maybe even be wrong about this. I don't want a tour. There's assertions. JUnit is a test library. Trying to think XUnit reporter. I'm trying to show you what it kind of looks like. XUnit reporter. So it generates this XML file, and then you can use it to, I'm trying to see if there's an example. Yeah, here's an example of what the test result looks like. So it's a little bit more basic, but it has your standard pass-fail. And then it's going to have like a history of how many times it's failed and things like that. So does that answer it? I forgot what your question was. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, so if you go here, they've got the demo on there that you can look at. There's a whole bunch of stuff with it. So you basically have to feed it data, and it just takes that data. It doesn't care where that data comes from. It just takes it and creates a report from it. But it's a really nice visual that you can see, how your tests are going. It's got timing as well in there. So I want to get more into this, but it's a lot of stuff. And then, yeah. Anything else? Cool. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris. And if you need bathroom break, right around the corner is where the bathrooms are. And there's pizza and stuff, which I'm going to go partake on.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I already introduced myself. My name's Chris, just in case you forgot. So I'm going to talk about React. Oh, I got to put on the map. Is that good? Can you hear me on the internet? Okay. Okay, so has anybody here worked with React before? All right, couple. Yeah, I know you have, Steve. If you haven't worked with it, have you heard of it before? Is it totally new to you? Have you heard of it? Maybe some people that haven't. Okay, so just going to spend a couple minutes to give you just a quick introduction to React and what it is and why it was created and what problems it solves. So React is a library for building user interfaces. It was created by Facebook, and they open sourced it a few years back. And Facebook created React to solve a lot of the problems that they had on Facebook.com, right? So Facebook is a complicated site. There's a lot of stuff going on. And the very short, probably wrong version of the story is that, so you know on Facebook up in the top right, there's the notification section. They've got that red highlight that shows up if you've got somebody, messaging you or sending you, whatever. I don't use Facebook that much, but if somebody's sending you a message or trying to chat with you, or if you've got new friends or requests, whatever, that little number up there updates. And they were having a really difficult time making sure that that number was always the number that it should be, right? Because the page was complicated. You had chat down in the corner. You had different parts of the page that were all doing things, and you were interacting with them. And if you chatted with somebody, it might update that notification status up there. And it kept getting out of sync because there was too many things trying to talk to it and mess with it at the same time. And so the conclusion that they came to at Facebook is that they needed to come up with a system that allowed them to have a single source of truth for all the data in their application so that they could always have that one source of truth stay in sync with everything. And also basically to enforce that not too many different pieces of code were messing with other pieces of the page at the same time. So so by the way, for those of you that are here from CodeUp, how long have you been in CodeUp? A few weeks? So how comfortable do you feel with JavaScript? Thumbs up? Good. Okay. So if you've done just basic JavaScript in the browser before, if you're just making a plain site from scratch and just has a little bit of functionality, you're probably writing selectors. Maybe you're using jQuery that says, hey, go find this element and change its HTML to this, or go find this element and change its class to that. The browser is pretty dangerous because anything on the page, any piece of code running on the page can update anything on the page, right? And that leads to problems, right? Because I might have some widget that I've created. Say on Facebook, I've made this chat component. I have this chat component, and I think I know that I'm coding this, but somebody else accidentally on the page might accidentally target something in that section, or they might deliberately target it and try to change it. And now all of a sudden my component isn't showing what I think it should be showing because there's too many people that can access the page at the same time. So React helps to solve those problems. One, giving you a single source of truth for your data, and second, providing a very structured way for accessing code. In a React application, you can't just go willy-nilly saying, hey, go change this element over there, go add this class over here. You're not allowed to do that. React is going to actually shout at you, is going to throw up some errors if anybody tries to do that. So React is all about components. It is completely component-based. Has anybody used Angular before? Maybe, okay. Never mind, I was going to use some analogies, but I'll pass. But basically, in React, you create components, and a component is responsible for one thing, and it is the owner of that thing. So you might create a React component for these buttons here. You might create a React component for the nav bar at the top. You might even have a component for this content here. Whatever it is, your entire page, your entire app is going to be built out of components. Your app at the very highest level itself is just a component, down to just a single button is just a component. So React is all components all the time. And every component is the complete master of its code and its functionality. If I have, again, so if Facebook has their notification area up at the top right, the only thing that can change that is that component. So if you want to mess with that data, you've got to talk to that component and talk to it in the way that it has, exposed or provided to you. I was going to show this really quick. This just came out very recently. Every year, Stack Overflow does a developer survey. And if you look at the trending tech, which basically is showing what's new on Stack Overflow, what are people asking and answering questions about, React has shown a 300% increase from the last time that they did this survey. So React has been taking off big time. And hopefully you'll see why by the time we get to the end of this. So just a couple things before we get started. So if you want to get started with React yourself, the absolute best place to start is with Create React App. So, write this down, remember that, search for Create React App. This is a command line tool. Facebook just put this out actually just a few months ago, so it's still relatively new. But more or less, the way that you use this thing is you install the command line tool, and then you say, Create React App, my app, whatever you want to name your app. And then you hit npm start, and it will launch it. It's ready to go. And you don't have to worry about all the build configuration and all the things that you have to figure out just to get an app going. So it is a super nice way to get started with React. So check that out if you want to dive into it. It also will create like a very good production-ready bundle. So you can say npm run build, and it will build your app up so that it's ready for production, and all the configuration that it does internally is really good and actually ready for production. So do check out Create React App. That's what I'm running here for the demos that I'm going to be showing. However, just in case, if you don't want to even do that, it is still possible to just run React in the browser. So I threw together this React simple thing. If you want to come borrow this code, if you go to just.github.com/Chris Bateman, and then click on this React simple, and I'll show you this. Basically, it adds some script tags that will turn your React code into what it needs to be, and you can test React like this. You never want to do this in a production, in a real app, but just for playing around with it, really easy. That's a fine way to do it. So if you don't even want to mess with getting, Node running, if you don't have that ready, if you just want to download an HTML page and be able to play with it right away, come out here and grab this. I'll post a link to it on the meetup also. And that's just an easy way to start playing with it right away. So, and that is actually what I'm going to look at here first, and I want to just focus on a couple things. So first off, I'm using a tool called Babel. So there's two scripts here for React, and then there's another one called Babel. So Babel is a tool that transpiles JavaScript, and it has gotten huge over the last 2 years now, I think. Wrong site. But the main point of Babel is to turn future JavaScript syntax or JavaScript syntax that isn't supported by today's browser into syntax that does work in today's browser. So you can write with new syntax, and it will turn it into something that today's browsers can use. So it's really handy. It's really complex in a lot of ways. So this is basically an example of what it will do. So it's like map is a pretty new function in JavaScript, and it will, oh, sorry, I was not looking at that. Arrow functions. Arrow functions are even newer than map. Map isn't that new. Arrow functions are very new in JavaScript. I think some of the latest browsers support them, but IE 11 doesn't. A lot of ones don't. So it will take that JavaScript and turn it into something that does work in today's browser. So we're going to be using a little bit of that today. I'm going to try to not do too much of it in case it's new to you, to throw you off too much. But one other thing that Babel does for us is it translates our JSX code. So JSX is, again, a part of React, and it is a syntax. I don't know why Sublime won't let me scroll down here. So we're just going to focus on this line here for just a minute. So it's really weird to people that have been working in JavaScript for a while. When they first come to React, it really can tend to throw them for a loop for a little while, because this right here is definitely not valid JavaScript, right? That looks like HTML, and it is. It's supposed to look like HTML. If I were to go and throw this code, just straight into Chrome or Firefox, it's going to say, what the crap is this? This does not make sense. This is not JavaScript. But this is valid JSX. So just to show you a little bit about what's happening under the hood here. So this is, Babel actually has like this little playground where you can go and type right into it, and it'll show you how it's converting it. So when I create this div, which here looks like HTML, in reality under the hood, Babel is going to turn it into this line of JavaScript here. So we're not going to spend too much time worrying about all this, but the main thing to keep in mind is that when you see something with these angle brackets, which looks like HTML, what you're really doing is you're creating a React element under the hood. So whenever you open up something with the angle brackets, you're creating a React element out of that thing. So you can do this with plain browser elements, right? You can do divs, spans, buttons, all the regular stuff. And this is what's actually happening under the hood. The one thing to keep in mind here is that capitalization matters. Okay, so if you're using lowercase, in this case, this is a div, you're always going to use a lowercase element when you're creating just a plain browser element. So if it's a div or a span or a button, always do lowercase. So you'll notice right now that this is creating this div in quotes. As soon as I change this to an uppercase div, you see what happened over here is that now we're creating an element out of a variable named div. So we're not just passing this string div into React.createElement. We're actually creating an element from a variable. So in this case, I might have, I got getting my require confused here. I might have a component named div, and this is how I'm gonna import that into my app and use it. So this is something that you'll do a lot. So whenever you have your own custom component, you got to name it with capital letters so that React knows to do this with it. So that's the main trick. There's some other kind of gotchas in JSX, but that's the one thing to be aware of as we're getting started. Any questions so far about JSX or anything else I've talked about? Is anybody weirded out by this, or is this okay? We all right? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back. I'm going to jump over to my browser. So I'm just running, again, just this plain page in the browser. And so you can see what's happened over here is inside the body, I've got this div that says hello world, because in my page, I'm telling it to render this hello world div into document.body. So this React DOM.render thing, you don't need to worry about this too much. You're only going to call this once ever in your application for the most part. So if we have like a large application, we're gonna say render our app into wherever you want to render it into. So the cool thing about this is that you can make the whole page your app, or if you already have a website and you don't want to revamp the whole thing, you can render a React component into just a little section of the page, right? I can send this app to wherever I want. In this case, I'm rendering it to the body, but you could render it anywhere. So it's really easy to get started with React if you already have a website. It's easy to pull it in and start kind of incrementally upgrading your website that way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we create an actual React component. There's a couple ways to do this, and we may get to some of the other ways, but we're going to just stick with this for now because it's most simplest when you're getting It's the simplest thing when you're getting started. So the React library has this function called createClass, and basically it's going to tell React how to create your component. There's only one requirement for a class, and that is that it must have a render function. Every component has to have a render function. It has to return an element of some type. By the way, this is a little bit of future JavaScript syntax here. This is the non-fancy equivalent of that. So basically here again, we're just passing in this object literal with the property render, and that property is a function which returns some JSX. Yeah?
About that syntax, can that render be named anything?
Can it render what?
Can the name render, can that be anything, or is it specific?
No, that is one that has to be specific.
I mean, sorry, in this syntax. So if I wanted to create like a start function, I could just do start friends.
Yeah. And in fact, we're going to do that. So if you want to add, custom functions to your class, you can totally do this. Let's say custom function. And again, this is the ES6 version of this. A lot of ES6 is just finding ways to make it so that you don't have to write the word function anymore. So you could do that, and that would be the exact same thing as doing this. But you must have a render function. So if you can see here in this case, we've got a div, and it just contains some plain HTML. Right now, it just looks like regular HTML, and that's great. One thing to keep in mind is that you must always return one single element from each React component. You cannot do something like this. All right, so there always has to be one single root element, and I think this is actually something that React is trying to change right now, but at least for the present term, you always have to return one element. So if you want to return two things, you've got to wrap it up in a div or something else. So now that I've got this app component, so I'm going to go ahead and jump down here and switch that to say I'm going to render this app into the body, and we'll jump back and refresh the page. And now you can see that I've got that new data here, my div with the H1 and the P. Good enough so far? Okay. So I'm actually going to go ahead and jump over to my Create React app because it's going to do some nice things like auto update for me, and it's a little bit nicer. So this is basically the exact same thing we have going on here. One of the things that Create React app does for you is it does that render call for you, so you don't even have to do this because it's going to take like your main app file and just do that for you automatically. Just to talk a little bit about the syntax here in case you're not familiar with it, again, this is stuff that's new to JavaScript. So the import statement is a way to bring in code from another file, more or less, and you also can export things. So in this case, I'm saying I want the default export in this file to be this React class that I'm creating here. So these are keywords in JavaScript to say, you know, whatever comes out the other side of this is what I want to be the default export for this file. So you're probably going to use that a lot. In fact, all of your components are going to look pretty much something just like this. So just to make sure that my server is still running, I'm going to throw an exclamation mark on it, and there it is. You can see it going now. I'm going to make this smaller. Okay, so as I mentioned before, in a React application, everything is built out of components. So you have to have a way to handle data within those components and pass data down throughout your application. So it's really good to think of React as a kind of a hierarchy. When you're getting started with it, you want to put the data, whatever your data is, at kind of the most common place and pass that down just hierarchically down into the components where it needs to live. So I've got this other file here called to-do because we're going to turn this into a very small to-do application because that's what you always do, right? So I've got this other to-do component here. And just to show you how this works, which isn't too exciting, so I'm going to take that to-do component and render it in here. I've kind of got like one more component than I need to here, but that's fine. So again, you can see I'm now rendering this to-do component into my application. And we might do that because say we've got other things going on in the page, right? That just might be a section. So whatever. So we've got this to-do component, and we're rendering that in our app now. But let's say that, so this to-do component is a reusable thing, right? And we want to be able to change this H1 that shows up here. So over here right now, we've got, to-dos. It's just hard-coded. But let's say that we want whoever's using this component to be able to change that name. So the way that you can pass data down to a component is through something called props. And this looks just like attributes in plain HTML. So let's go ahead and say title equals my app. Like that. So I am now passing a prop called title into this to-do component. And that to-do component can access that prop by doing this. This.props.title. So we'll save that and jump back over here, and you can now see that we're rendering out my app. There it is. So there's our H1, and we're passing my app into it. So that's basically the first and simplest way to pass data around in a React application is with props. You can just pass these down directly to components that you're using. So when you have these kind of reusable components, the props are mainly the API of the components. Any questions so far? Okay. If I say anything that is really confusing or loses you, please raise your hand and let me know. So we've got props, and then we have something called state. So state is the data that this component owns itself. So We've gonna, so the basic way that you're going to add state in this method, again, we'll see if we have time to come back to it because there's different ways to create a React component. But when you're doing create class, the way that you add state to your component is with this function called getInitialState. And so what you're going to do inside getInitialState is you're going to return an object that contains that state. So again, so we want to make a kind of to-do application here. So let's just have, let's say, a list of to-dos, and we'll make it, well, let's go ahead and put something in it here. So we'll make an array that has a couple items in it, 1 and 2. So this does nothing to our application. We've added state to our components, but there's nothing to see yet. By the way, React has developer tools that you can add to Chrome, which are super handy. I should probably zoom in on this a little better. So if you use the React developer tools, you can see not just the HTML, but also all of the components that you're using. And so you can come down to these components and see, okay, here's all the props being passed to it, and here's the current value of the state that component has, so I can see what that to-dos is, and I can check that as it changes. Just FYI, it comes in pretty handy. So we've got a couple of to-dos, and let's say that we want to go ahead and just list these out in our app. So we're not going to do anything too fancy here. We'll make an unordered list. And what we want to have here is a list of LIs, right? So we want to have this list that's supposed to render out 1 and 2. So in a lot of other UI frameworks, so if you've used Angular or Ember or anything like that, they often have a kind of templating syntax, or if you've done server-side coding before, most server-side languages that let you output HTML are going to have some kind of syntax you can use. So you might end up with some of those things. You might have, I don't know what it might look like. I'm just making this up, but you might have some kind of syntax that is going to say for each item in the array, and then you can render out whatever it is that you want to do inside of that. JSX and React has no special syntax. All you have is just JavaScript, and that's a good thing because it basically means React itself is pretty simple. You can create components. There's these particular functions that you need to have on the components, but other than that, the API of React itself is very simple. So when you're learning to do things in React, a lot of the time you're just learning JavaScript, and that's great because those skills are transferable to other tools that you use as well. So. And there's often more than one way to do something in React too, which is good and bad sometimes. So the way that you access state in the first place in React is that it's very similar to props. You've got this .state and then the name of whatever that is. So so this is the other thing we need to, I didn't cover this about JSX, right? So wherever you've got these curly braces here, this is how you drop back into plain JavaScript, right? So that's why this worked. This .props.title that we had here, I could also do this like this, right? I could say let title equals this .props.title, and then just pass that title variable into this. Doesn't matter. There's nothing really simple about this. Whenever you open up curly braces, you're just dropping into plain JavaScript and returning something, right? So this is just returning this variable, more or less. So this would work just as well. I'll just leave that there just for fun. So if I were to save that, you can see React is actually doing some magic. So basically what I've done is I've passed an array into the curly braces. React will render pretty much anything you throw at it for the most part. You can pass in a string or a number or an array. If it gets an array, it's just going to go ahead and kind of dump out a string version of whatever's in the array there. But that's not really what we want, right? We need to have a list item around each of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilize actually that map function that we saw earlier. So we'll talk about that for a sec. So map is a really helpful function in JavaScript. If you haven't used a map or a for each or a sort or a filter, they're all pretty similar. So whenever you have an array, you've got these functions available on them. So the job of the map function is saying, okay, we're going to take this array and we're going to basically run this function on every item in that array and then return a new array with those transformations applied. So just in case you weren't familiar with that, let's just look at something really quick in the Chrome console here. So let's say that we had an array that contained a couple of numbers, right, 1 and 2. And I've got this array, and let's say that I want to turn this array into a new one that contains these numbers plus 1. So I want to take my 1 to 2 array and turn it into an array of 2 and 3. So a easy way that I can do that with the map function is I can say map, and Chrome does support arrow functions, so we can do this. So I can say I want to take every item in this array and turn that basically into item plus 1. So you see what I got returned was a new array containing 2 and 3. It ran this function on every element in the array. So that's what map is doing. And by the way, if you're not familiar with arrow functions, which you may not be, basically that was the equivalent of just doing this, just passing a plain function into it. So that would yield the same result there. We're not going to talk about arrow functions tonight, but that's basically just, again, a shortcut so that you don't have to write the word function. Nobody wants to write the word function. All right. What's that? It's terrible. Nobody wants to do that. It's 4 more characters. So anyhow, so we can do the exact same thing here. So again, we're going to take this array of strings and we're going to turn them into something else. So we're going to go ahead and say return a list item that contains that item. See if that does the trick for us. Yep, there it is. So now we've got our list items. You'll notice here that React spat out this error. Whenever you're doing iteration like this, and I don't really know why this is, but just for some performance reasons, more or less, that React has, whenever you're iterating over something, React wants you to add a unique key to it. So we can satisfy that pretty easily. So this I is just going to be the iteration count from the map function, so I'm going to pass that key onto the list item. And you notice usually, whenever you have problems in React, it is usually really good about telling you what exactly is going wrong and what you need to do to fix it. So you see that they had a link in here, and it says, basically told you where the problem was. It says check the render method of to do, and then also here's a URL where you can go to see more information. So React is usually pretty good about helping you figure out what you need to do when you do something wrong. So I saved that, and our error message has gone away now. So that is how you can kind of iterate over items in React and display them. Any questions on that? You okay? All right. So now we've got this list of items being printed out. Let's say we want to actually do something to it. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to add a button. I'm just going to do this for now. We're going to add a button here that says add item. I cannot type and talk at the same time, which is really bad for doing presentations like this. So we've got this button here, and it calls this.addItem. So as Kevin mentioned earlier, we can add any functions that we want to our components. That'll work just fine. So just to make sure that that works, we'll put a console log in there really quick. Push the button. Yeah, there's our console log. So we know the button works. All right, so clicking this button is going to call this function, and what we want this function to do is update our state and add a new item to it. So React has a function called setState, and whenever you want to change the state in your component, you're always going to want to use this function, setState. And basically, this is just going to look like exactly what we did before, right? We're going to pass in an object with the properties of the items that we want to change. If I have a number of items in my state, I've got a few things in here. I can pass in to-dos here, and it won't mess with A and B. It's only going to update the things that I pass in. So let's say that we're going to just go ahead and set our state to something new. We'll say 3, and let's give that a try. So we come over here, we hit add item, and now my list says 3 because I just set my state to be I changed the value of to-dos, right? So one thing that I want to point out here really fast, so this obviously isn't what we want yet. We don't want to wipe out the data that we have already. We just want to add a 3 to it, right? So right now we're just wiping it out. But the one thing that I want to stop and kind of point out is just kind of how things are working in React right now. So again, if this was a very old school JavaScript app, I might have a click function for this button, and when it gets clicked, we'd go out and say, okay, now go find this list here, and we're going to add this new HTML to that list, and we're going to append this new item, we're going to add that to the existing HTML, and we're going to mess with the page in a lot of ways. React has saved us from needing to worry about any of that. You never need to worry about updating anything or changing anything, right? The way that I render out this list didn't change. So basically, this is really, really awesome because it lets you write your components without having to worry about how things change. React changes things for you automatically. When the state changes, it's going to re-render with that state. That's the other thing I didn't mention earlier is that whenever state or props change, it's going to re-render. So over here, up in my main application, if I were to change this title on this prop, to do is going to say, oh, prop changed, I need to re-render. And so then it's going to go through and render your function again. But yeah, more or less, the way that you output your HTML is very clean and very predictable because you never have to worry about changes, right? This thing is always just rendering out HTML based on state and based on props, right? That's all that this thing does. So if you've done server-side development in PHP or any kind of just plain old scripting language before, it's actually kind of similar to doing that kind of server-side development, right? You've got data and you render the page based on that data. You never really need to worry about going out and messing with stuff after the fact. And React very much has that feel. You're always rendering based on data, and you don't ever really worry about changing it. What I worried about doing up here was changing my states, but React took care of all the changes for me automatically. And so that takes a lot of complexity out of building a JavaScript application. It lets your functionality really focus on being just functionality and not worrying about exactly what's happening, to this data. So let's go ahead and update this the right way. So we want to add an item, not just totally replace it. So this is where there's another feature. A new feature of JavaScript comes in really handy, which is this spread operator. So basically what I am doing here, I'm going to recreate this line down here, is I am saying, well, let me do this another way. I'm saying, so what I want to pass in, what I want my to-do state to be is this new array, and this new array is going to contain all the items which are in this existing array, plus this new 3 item. So whenever you see these 3 dots here, in this situation, we're basically taking this array and spreading it out into this new array. So I could have accomplished pretty much the same thing by like making a copy. This is not the right way to do this, but I don't have time to get into it. So let's say we have this thing called like new to-dos, and we're going to say our new to-dos equals this dot state dot to-dos, and then I'm going to say new to-dos dot push 3. So I kind of could have accomplished the same thing by doing this, but this is just kind of a shortcut to accomplish this. So in this case, this is just a JavaScript shortcut for taking my existing state, creating a new array that contains that plus this new item. So now when we go over to our app, hopefully, when we hit add item, it's going to add 3 to that list, and I can keep adding that, and that'll keep adding it. So if we jump over to our React DevTools and look at our component, we can see, that's the value of our to-dos array now. Because every time we hit that, we added 3 to it. So this is basically just a shortcut for adding something to an array and without modifying the original array. So any questions on that? Okay, so let's make it so that we can actually get some real data into this, right? We're going to want to actually name the to-do that we want to pass into this. So let's go ahead and create an input element here. we're going to do this the right way for accessibility and add a label too, because that's a good practice. All right, so we've got input here, and we want to be able to type something into this input and have that item get added to our list. So again, we're not going to, there's some other ways to do this, but we're not going to worry about it too much for right now since we're just getting started, but there's a concept in React called refs. If you ever need to get access to an actual browser element, you're going to want to use a ref. So we're going to give this ref a name. We're just going to call it our to-do input. And now I have the ability to access this element from elsewhere in my code. So I can come up here into my add item function, and whenever this gets clicked, what we're going to do is we're going to say, so let's just log this out just to make sure that we can get it. So let's say input value equals this dot refs dot, what do we call that? To do input dot value. Let's console log that just to see if we're getting the right thing. Okay, so you saw I had this text ASDF in there, and that got console logged out. So when I accessed this ref like this, I just got an access to the browser instance of that input. So this value here is, again, nothing special. This is just the same thing that I would get if I came over to my DevTools. If we look at that input and said .value, if you didn't know this, $0 is just a shortcut to get a reference to whatever's highlighted here. So exact same thing that we're doing here. So now we know what the value of that input is, and so we can just go ahead and pass that into change that we're making here. And let's say we also want to, it's kind of weird for this to keep saying that it works, but let's go ahead and clear that out. So we'll say this dot refs dot to do input dot value equals empty string. So now, hopefully, after we click that, we cleared out the value that was there previously. So now I can add whatever I want to that list. All right. So any questions about that? All right. I want to show you one more thing. Again, with React, just because it doesn't have a template syntax or any kind of template helpers for you. As we mentioned, you have to do things in JavaScript. There's some kind of different ways to do stuff. So let's say that if our to-do list ends up having more than 3 items, we want to display a message to the user, right? So let's say we want to have div, you have too many things to do, but we only want this item to show up if we have more than 2 items. So this is not what we want to see right now. I'm going to put some break tags here. Don't ever do this, by the way. I'm just going to get that out of the way. It's the lazy way of adding spacing. So again, in React, I can open up a script block here, and kind of the first inclination when you're trying this out is that you might want to say, okay, well, maybe I can just do an if statement, right? If this .state .todos .length is greater than 2, then we'll return this div or something like that. This is not going to work for you in React because whenever you're opening up a curly brace, you need to be returning something, and an if statement does not return anything. You could, again, there's multiple ways to skin this cat, but you generally just can't open up an if statement and do something because an if statement is not going to actually return anything out. It's just a statement. So we got to come up with something a little bit more clever than that. So one way that you can do this is we can take that message and actually just turn it into a variable. So we'll just call it message. And up here, we'll say let message. And then we'll add an if block that says if this .state .todos .length is greater than 2, then message equals, whoa. Message equals this div. So there it is. Thank you. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but this is one way to do it. And I like this a lot of the time because it tends to help you keep your actual HTML pretty clean, right? There's some ways that you can kind of have some shortcuts to kind of simulating an if statement down here. But a lot of the time it's nice to do this anyways, depending on the app and depending on how complicated it is. It's nice to do this because your HTML can stay fairly clean and keep the logic in one places. In some cases that may not always make the most sense, but that's cool too. So we'll go ahead and add an item, and you see once we did that, our message showed up. But again, this is really cool again because again our render statement didn't do anything fancy. It didn't look to see, oh, did it increase? Did it go from 2 to 3? It didn't care about any of that. The only thing our render function cares about is what is the state, what are the props, and what kind of HTML should I output based on that. Under the hood, React goes and it makes all the updates in the page, and you never have to worry about any of that. So, and once you've spent some more time in React and kind of gotten used to this way of doing things, it actually really spoils you. It is really hard to go back to writing plain JavaScript. I know because I had to make a page the other day, and it had about 15 lines of JavaScript functionality. It wasn't something that was really worth making a whole app for, but all 15 lines I was going, oh my gosh, this is so primitive. Why is it like this? So it spoils you a little bit. Being able to write things declaratively like this is excellent. So that's pretty much all the main points I wanted to cover. If you all want to go into anything else, we can do that. But otherwise, I'm pretty much done. So do you have any questions about React or anything else that you want to talk about or look at, Kevin?
So if you wanted to make that input field its own component, how would you send the state to this component?
Sure. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So let's take this input here. It's going to add some complication, but we'll do that. I don't want to get too fancy here. So what was the question? How would you send?
Yeah, basically how do you send state between two components?
State between components? All right. So let's go ahead and create a new file here. I'm just going to call it thing. Because it's a thing. So I've created this new thing file. It's just in the same directory here. So we're going to say import thing from /thing. By the way, in case you're not familiar with kind of importing and exporting things in JavaScript or in Node, whenever you see something like this where there's nothing in front of it, it's just a word, that means that you're pulling this from your Node modules, from your dependencies. If you've got the /, then this is saying, okay, relative path, from this directory, find this. So that's where that's coming from. So in fact, can we make the button the item? So let's go ahead and turn our button. Let's say that we've got this reusable button component because it's got some fancy functionality. So here we've got this button, but this thing doesn't know what to add, right? So this on-click can't be here like this. Oh yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention is this .props.children's. Let's show that real quick. All right, so we've taken out our button, and in its place, I'm going to add my thing. Create React app is really good about doing this too. Whenever you have a syntax error, it's going to display that for you in your actual application, which is really nice. You don't have to go back to your developer console to find it, so that's pretty handy. So it says JSX attributes must only be assigned a non-empty expression, so it doesn't like that I did this. So we'll just take it out. Again, React is really pretty good about giving you instructions about what you need to do to fix things. So here I've got a button, and it says add an item, which is what I wanted it to say. Did I do this right? Is this the right way to do button? It's just the text like that, right? All right. So whenever you can create a component, so we didn't mention this earlier, so I'm glad this came up, is that you can pass data into it by its props, right? So I could say, you know, text equals add an item just as well. Or you can also just have them pass it into the body of it. When you do this works out really well for components that need to wrap things, right? So if I'm creating this thing, whatever it is, if it wasn't a button and I needed to pass kind of more HTML into it, I could do that, and the thing has the ability to kind of render its code and then just go ahead and pass through the children like this. So very similar to props, it's just kind of where you're passing it through and what the needs are there. So by passing this text through, which is kind of similar to how you'd do this if it was actually a button. Again, so that's another way that we can add that data to this component. So the thing that we need to do here, however, is hook up the click functionality, right? So now we're kind of in trouble because the button is over here. This is where the on-click needs to be, but what is it going to call, right? It doesn't have access to the function. In fact, it shouldn't know about our add an item function that lives over here. So what we can do is we can just go ahead and pass this on-click through as a property to things. So just like this was before, this .add item. And that doesn't do anything magically on its own, but that is now available as a prop to this component. So, did that refresh? Refresh is too fast. So there it is, still working, but we have a reusable button component that lets this component kind of pass through whatever it needs. So again, most of the time, the props of a reusable component is going to be your interface with it, right? So if this button wants you to be able to change the text, it has to provide that, explicitly provide that. If it wants you to have an on-click, it has to explicitly, let you do that. But again, that's just because, now that we've made this component is the complete and total owner of this code and whatever other functionality goes along with it. So props are typically going to be your interface for that. So if it was an input component, we need to know, so the app might need to know when the input is updated, right? So you can do that by passing, again, just a function like this, a handler that will say, when on change, when this input changes, tell me about the change and fire this function. Is at least one way to do that. Once you start getting into much more complex apps, you probably want to take a look at Redux. I wouldn't do this when you're just getting started with React, but once you're very comfortable with React and very comfortable with dealing with props and state and React itself, Redux is worth taking a look at. It basically provides a bit of a more organized way to keep your data in one place and have different components be able to access and interact with that data. Again, when your app gets really big and complex, it turns out that kind of passing data down to components that are all over the place and maybe nested down very deeply gets kind of clunky in some cases. But React generally encourages you to stick with the raw React as much as you can. When you get to kind of the level of complexity that's starting to hurt you, then Redux is worth taking a look at. So there's a lot of other ways to, it's not their website, where's the website? Anyhow, there's a lot of good documentation about Redux. So that's something to look into once you've gotten more into it. And there's different ways of handling data and dealing with some of those issues that come up. Sorry, that was way too long an answer. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
You're saying that the components, well, how would you change set state from a AJAX request, for instance, rather than a button push?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know you can't necessarily demonstrate the server side of that.
Yeah. So this is just one way to do this. So React has a bunch of lifecycle methods. We haven't really talked about them because you don't really need to know about them too much until you need them, but you can basically have access to different points of how a component is rendered. And so you can check their docs to find out more about these. They've got information about what all the different life cycle methods are and when you should use them, when's are good cases for this. So one of these is called component did mount. So that basically this is just going to fire as soon as the component renders and gets injected into the page for the first time. Component did mount will get called afterwards. So typically, if you have a component that needs to make a data request or something like that, just right off the bat, component did mount is usually the place where they recommend that you put that. So if you have, I don't want to write an XHR request here, so we're just going to use pseudocode here, if that's all right. So let's say that we've got a get data function, and you're going to go out and hit some URL to fetch the data that you need. And let's say this has a success callback, right? If you're using raw XHR, then you're going to have like an onload, whatever it is that you do to get that data. So in this case, as soon as the React application has executed and mounted everything for the first time, it's immediately going to call this function. It'll go out to some URL and then return with the data. So once I get that data, again, I can do whatever I want to do with that data. So if this is returned, a list of to-dos, we might, probably, let's say we don't know about the to-dos to start with, right? We're getting those to-dos from our application. So depending on what your service looks like and what its data, returns, it might look something like this, or you might have to process it or loop through it, but it might be something more or less as easy as that. So is that what you were asking, or not quite?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was wondering about. It's kind of, that's cool. I was looking for.
Yeah, where I work at least, there's a library called Axios that we use for our XHR requests. And it's promise-based and it's nifty, but more or less same kind of thing as this. So, yeah. Can you say that a little louder? Yeah. In fact, you're correct, because that's not going to work like that, because this binding is not going to be right. I didn't want to get into that today, but there's the arrow function version of that. What issues have we had? Honestly, we've been pretty happy with it for the most part. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. It's kind of become the de facto tool for managing data. There's some other options out there, but Redux is generally the most widely used. But I don't know. It's generally we like it. So I haven't had too many issues, at least from my perspective. Steve, do you want to comment on that? You might have some other thoughts. Yeah, take some learning. There are a lot of good resources out there for learning, at least, but yeah, like everything, it takes a little getting used to. Any other questions? Cool. If you have any other questions after the fact, stuff that you think of later, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm Bateman Chris on Twitter. I'll post on the meetup thing with some of the links, like to create React app and all that. So feel free to comment there, and I'll keep an eye on that. But that's it. Thank you.
Okay, that's about it. Feel free to stick around, although it's getting kind of late. If you are into Coke or Diet Coke, take one of those home, because my fridge is filling up with them and I don't drink them. So please do take one of those home. And same thing goes for the pizza. Please take the pizza home. The beer, please leave. I will dispose of that properly. And yeah, if you want to watch that again, it's on YouTube. Just search Hill Country JS. We've got a channel up there. And yeah, you can watch through all of it if you want to kind of check in on things and maybe walk through creating your own app yourself. Trying trying to think if there's something else that I needed to mention. I may move the time, like the official start time, back to 7:30 because I'm terrible about getting here at 7. This isn't the first time I've run really late. I don't know if that helps y'all or not. If it's going to be a big issue, let me know. But you just watch the meetup page and see if it's 7:30. We may also move the event from downtown up north a little bit to make it a little bit less hectic getting here, at least for folks who aren't in downtown. So just keep watching the meetup page for changes. That might happen soon. December, there's not going to be a meetup just because I like taking December off. So, but November, I may or may not be here. If not, I'm going to beg Chris to run the show and hopefully have a speaker for that. Trying to think if there's anything else. Nope, that's it. That's all I can think of. So thank y'all for coming out. Really appreciate it. And feel free to stick around until, I don't know, you want to go home. Thanks.
It's really hard to do in 30 minutes, and I didn't do it in 30 minutes.